Since I was a volunteer, recording. Since I was a volunteer back in Milwaukee before I even started here in Minnesota. So they're a personal passion of mine, and I'm just so thankful for all the great work you do in educating people and encouraging people really to get out there and enjoy the outdoors, enjoy birds and nature. I'm a pretty informal speaker, so we'll just jump right into it. And just want to make sure that, okay, sound is okay. So we took this photo, I took this photo last spring migration. You may have seen it on our social media. It's a little Rubicon kinglet, and he was in his box that the client transported him in. And I was working at the time on a window strike project, which you'll see at the end of this. And so all those photos, we wanted the birds on their stainless steel exam tables or counters. And so we took them out of the box, took a picture, came downstairs and went to post it on the social media, and then saw the writing on the back of the box and started laughing because we could not have coordinated this better. It's an Amazon box, but just like that headache gone made me laugh because that's what birds are basically suffering from when they hit a window, is a concussion. So most of you are probably familiar with WRC, but just in case you're not, we actually formed at the university in 1979. We broke off as our own nonprofit in the late 90s. We moved to Roseville in the early 2000s in a building that we built specific for wildlife rehabilitation. Since that time, we've grown quite a bit. We've gone from 5,000 patients a year to just over 19,000 last year, making us the busiest wildlife hospital in the world, which I think a lot of people don't realize. We're fairly quiet, all things considered. There's just some more stats about us. We are a full-fledged functioning emergency hospital. So we do surgeries, we have a digital radiology, we have ICU, we have vet techs who do all sorts of blood work, fecals, things like that in our lab. But we are a fully functioning emergency hospital. And then as far as support staff goes, we have very few support staff. And in fact, we just hired 2 new people to kind of join our communications development area. But up until now, we've been almost one-person departments, other than like our medical team and our animal care team. So most of the funds that we have go directly into animal care and medical care. And all those funds come from individuals or a few private foundations here and there. We don't receive any state or federal funding. We also don't go get patients. So when I think about my job and WRC, I like to take a step back. It's very, very awe-inspiring and humbling at the same time. The only reason we're the busiest wildlife hospital in the world is because people here in Minnesota have so much compassion and true passion for the outdoors and for wildlife. You know, people bring us the animals and they support our work. If they weren't demanding of our services, we would not be the busiest center in the world. And really that's got a lot of impact. And every time I come in to WRC, I think to myself, wow, you know, we have literally tens of thousands of clients who are relying on us to do the very best we can. And yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of fascinating. So I wanted to jump, there's all sorts of things, obviously, as a wildlife hospital that we do, but specifically we thought we would talk about how we deal with collisions in avian species. And so just this week alone, you can see our stats there. We've had 10 window strikes. That's just the species of birds that we've had from window strikes. You guys probably know what type of bird this is, but it is a dark-eyed junco. And you can see some stats there about our admits over the years. So our database goes back farther than 2011. but it's in a separate database that hasn't been fully imported all the way. So my stats tonight only go back to 2011. But there's a good look kind of at spring migration, fall migration, year totals for the past couple of years. And then, you know, we often think about glass, but there's a lot of birds that actually hit like the structure of a house. Woodcocks are one of them. They fly so low when they migrate. So woodcocks are a bird that oftentimes just hits a physical structure like a garage, not necessarily with glass. And then power lines. We don't talk a lot about power line collisions, but they should definitely be on our radar when we're talking about these things. So I'll give a little bit of time for the slide to sit there, just so you can go through it. But yeah, 146 different species have hit windows. And actually, we should change it, 147. Funny story, I was exporting this list out and I found 2 mammals on it. And I thought to myself, great, you know, somehow or another we changed the species name, we made a mistake. You know, there's no way a white-tailed deer hit a glass structure. And after I exported the list, I went back and double checked those 2 mammals, and sure enough, the white-tailed deer that had hit a glass structure actually did. They were trying to capture a fawn after the mom had been hit by a car, and it ran into someone's sliding glass door. So yep, we have a window collision for a white-tailed deer. And then the other one is an eastern gray squirrel, and he's not on this list. But yeah, he did the same thing. A dog was chasing him and he ran smack into a sliding glass door. So it's not just avian species that hit glass. So again, this is a bird you probably are all familiar with, but it is a yellow warbler. And then this is just some information on what we see as clinical signs when a window strike patient comes in. And this bird here, you'll notice a similar pattern in some of the photos that you're going to see later on. But this bird here is a classic example of a window strike bird. He's got his eyes closed, and or he'll have uncontrollable eye movements. This guy actually has a fractured beak. You can see the tip of the beak there. And then oftentimes we'll see them with a leg out, and either they're unable to control that leg, or they're actually using that leg to help brace themselves because they can no longer balance. They'll also have a ruffled or fluffed appearance, and that's due to stress. So this is kind of like classic symptoms that they would present. And then sometimes there's catastrophic internal damage as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, there can be catastrophic internal damage. Some of that we can't see. We don't have an MRI or a CAT scan here. I don't know how many of you follow our social media, but we had a bobcat kitten come in that had been hit by a car, blunt force trauma. And then the bobcat didn't make it. And when we had the necropsy done on it, we found out that its brain had actually hemorrhaged due to the impact of the blunt force trauma. And that's something we can't see. And it's the same thing with these birds. And in fact, I don't know if later on in the Q&A, I think Ann Laughlin is with us tonight, but we actually have volunteers here who do necropsy on our patients. And at some point in time, you all should talk with Ann. She has seen firsthand the incredible internal damage that blunt force trauma does to birds. I mean, fully separated aortas, esophagus that are completely torn off of the rest of their systems. And Anne can give you some really fascinating insights on that. And those are things we can't see. The bird comes in, it isn't doing well, we give it a chance, the bird dies, and then we open it up and we see, oh my gosh, this poor bird has been suffering. So since we're in the medical things, just to give you a heads up, there are going to be some medical pictures here and some video that are coming up. If you're at all sensitive to those, I just want to give you a heads up. So this ovenbird is another, it's going to present classic symptoms of a window strike. So it's unable to right itself. It looks paralyzed, but it's probably actually paresis, which is caused by swelling before full paralysis sets in. And this is just a classic window strike pose. You see this bird on the ground. If you're going to be doing the bird walks in downtown Minneapolis coming up, this is classic symptoms of a window strike. And then we can repair some of these things, especially the physical damage. The internal swelling is much more difficult for us to treat. But in these photos, we are doing a beak repair surgery on a cedar waxwing. And then the top right photo is an eye exam on a woodcock. And I don't know why this happens with woodcocks, but most of the woodcocks that come in after they've hit a structure, when we do an eye exam on them, they have ulcerated their eyes. So that green dye that you see, that dye actually sticks to the ulcerated areas of the eye. So everything that's green has been scraped and abraded, and that is due to the collision. And we see that a lot with woodcocks. So I don't know if they're coming up on it and maybe their beak impacts it and then they turn off and that's how their eye gets abraded. I don't know, but with woodcocks, we see that on a regular basis. And then the bottom bird is one of my favorite species. It's a great crested flycatcher. And you can see he has a wing wrap on, and that's most likely for a coracoid or some other fracture in his wing. So this next video is a full exam that we shot just last week, so it's very current. And I will let Dr. Rappaport take it from here.
I'm Dr. Amanda Rappaport at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Minnesota, and I'm going to walk you guys through a common yellow throat physical exam. So always kind of doing a visual exam on all our patients to make sure what they're doing. And immediately on our visual, we're to the side and we keep trying to roll it around. As you can see, we go upside down. That's not something that we want to see typically in our patients. This is a female common yellow throat. So these guys are migrating through this time. Okay. So I always like to start looking at the head to make sure if our eyes look abnormal, if we have any trauma there. And then I'll go immediately into listening for lung sounds such as crackles to see if we have blood in our lung fields, and to see if they have any harsh breath sounds. We're a little bit stressy here, so I'm going to start to hear some sounds. We have a little bit of what I call crackles. So because this bird was brought to us from a collision, I suspect we have trauma within our lung field, and so we have maybe pulmonary hemorrhage. And then kind of going through our orthopedic exam. She is reactive to me touching her clavicle, kind of extending her shoulders and kind of just feeling for anything. Ooh. She is a little feisty about it though. And then feeling her scapula is right here. We do have some laxity in our scapula. So a lot of times with these guys, we can treat any kind of bony fractures, maybe like clavicle fractures, especially with window strikes, but what we're most concerned about is all the head trauma they can get. For example, this patient is kind of becoming laterally recumbent, and she wasn't moving, as you know, she was rolling earlier today. So this would be more of a permanent to severe neurological damage associated from head trauma from a window strike. So right now we're going to do the best we can for her and take away her pain, and we're going to humanely euthanize. Oh, she's like dying.
I'm sure you'll probably have some questions for me about this, and we can deal with those in the Q&A too. But this is typical, and during migration, we will see multiple birds like this a day. And boy, it sure would be nice to end this, or at least make a dent in it. And it's, you know, due to organizations like yourself that more information is getting out there, the public's more aware of these things. And again, I just want to thank you all for your work in trying to stop things like this. So then power line collisions. This is a juvenile trumpeter swan, and you probably all know this, but just in case, we know it's a juvenile swan because it still has its silvery gray plumage. That swan will molt that out in its first full spring and turn white by its breeding season. So this swan, I actually picked this bird up from out in Monticello. It was there in the wintertime and it had hit a power line. And you can see the bird's, you know, vertical, at least during the exam. It's not lying recumbent on its side. And when I picked it up in Monticello, it was standing, it was eating corn. It was in with the other swans. Jim was able to go out there and just scoop the bird up and bring it into us. But the fascinating and really tragic part of all this is if you look at the photo on the right, you can actually see some pieces of corn there down by our vet's right hand, by her thumb. This bird, when it hit the power line, had completely sliced open its esophagus. And so it was trying to eat, like, their wildlife is programmed to try to survive. That's what they do. They survive. They're focused on survival. And this poor swan was doing everything it could to survive. And I think about the amount of pain that this bird must have been in, and yet still trying to survive. And this is not something we can repair. So we did humanely euthanize it. And that is a big part of what we do in wildlife rehab, you know. Our goal, of course, is to release any patients that we can. But overall, what we do is we end suffering. And ideally, that's through a treatment plan, you know, with a final goal of release. But in catastrophic injuries, the only way that we can end that suffering is to humanely euthanize them. And we are completely transparent on that, by the way. So if you ever bring us a patient, you can actually follow up on it and find out exactly what happens with it. So then we have a really cool case study on a pelican that hit a power line. And the picture on the left is Dr. Miranda Torkelson doing an admit exam on the pelican. A lot of people don't realize just how large these birds are until you're either right next to one or you see a photo like this and you realize that, you know, wow, look at that wing. So that's why I include that photo. The radiograph that's there, their anatomy is just fascinating to me, and I just love this radiograph. So I wanted to share that with you too. But the next slide is actually going to be a longer video, and it's going to talk about this bird's injuries and how we discovered them.
Hi, I'm Dr. Allison Carter, and this is my technician Ash, and we're doing a recheck exam on the pelican that you may have seen on our Facebook a couple of days ago. What we found in our initial admit exam is some abrasions on his beak, so we're just going to look at those. They look pretty good. And then we always want to check on these guys, how their feet are doing, because they like to be on a lot of, and his feet look really good. All right, and then I would like to see him walk around. We can have him walk around there. All right, so we're just assessing how active he is and how willing he is to ambulate. He's not very willing. You can tap him and give him his medications.
What does that mean?
So with this guy, we know on exam we were suspicious that he had hit something. because he has the abrasions on his beak, which you can see, and then some damage to his feathers. But he doesn't actually have any external trauma. And we actually found on radiographs that he does have separation of some of his organs. So his liver and his heart should sit like this, and on radiographs they're actually sitting like this because he was hit so hard that his organs moved. So it's probably painful, and he feels pretty bad. So we're controlling him with pain meds. We want him to continue to feel better and be more active and more willing to walk around. And then the other thing we found was that he has a high parasite load, which most of them do have parasites because they eat fish which have a lot of parasites. But with him feeling debilitated, he's not able to control that parasite load. So that's actually the medication we're going to give him. It actually coats his stomach where some of the parasites live. So we're going to go just right down in his couch, and then we're going to flush it down. Try to get it all the way down. Alright, and that will coat his stomach so he hopefully will feel better and want to eat even as we kill those parasites. So now Ash is going to take him back to his house, and I'm going to take you and show you our radiographs, which is how we diagnosed his trauma.
I see someone's breakfast is waiting for them.
Yeah.
Ooh, looks tasty.
Looks really good. I want some of those berries. So this is our digital radiographs, which is an invaluable tool for us. Like I said, we didn't really find a lot on his exam. But right here we can see these are his radiographs, and this is a different pelican. And right here is the heart, and this is the liver. And like I said, they should sit like this normally. Like you can see here, they kind of blend into each other. But with really big trauma, it hits those apart, and then the air sacs, which are basically everything else, will go in between and fill in, and that's this black here you can see. And that's a lot of trauma. You can imagine this is a really big bird. To move his organs around, that's a lot of trauma.
And he didn't break any bones
And he didn't break any bones.
That's amazing.
Yeah, birds are adapted to have these strong bones for flight, so it's really amazing, and hopefully we can support him through this and control his pain. But these radiographs, without this radiograph machine, we wouldn't have been able to diagnose that.
So what will happen? Will the air sacs move, or is there muscle in there that will pull them back together? Can you show us how it will kind of move?
Yeah, so these will come back together like this one. It's a soft tissue that's between these, and as he heals, just that soft tissue will pull these back together into their normal position, and then the air sacs will move back to their normal position. The air sacs are only there because of the tearing of that soft tissue, so as that knits together, it will push them out of the way.
And then, so just confirming, what you're saying is we wouldn't have found this except for the radiographs that we took.
Yep, he had basically no external signs of this. He was just quiet and had those abrasions, so we kind of suspected, but we didn't know how severe it is, and we wouldn't have known how much pain meds to give, how to control his pain, without knowing exactly how much trauma.
Again, we can talk more about this in the Q&A, but I think the key thing here is, this is one of the hardest parts of wildlife rehab. There's usually no, like if you take your pet into a hospital, you usually know what happened to it. But with us, a lot of times people don't know. They just find these animals. We had a gentleman last week who brought us a sandhill crane, and it was standing at the end of his driveway on the cul-de-sac. Cars had been going by. He assumed it had a glancing blow from a car. It had trauma when it came in. We could tell that from its eyes. But it never recovered from its neuro, and its neuroscience kept getting worse and worse and worse, until it got to the point where it was clear the bird was not going to recover. And so we humanely euthanized it. Lo and behold, we got the HPAI results back, and it tested positive for HPAI. So you know, a lot of times all we can do is treat what we can actually see or find in blood work, fecal, things like that. And our vets did a great job with this one. The pelican, you saw him in the earlier part of the video. Pelicans are derpy birds anyway. They're just these goofy, laid back birds, but they should walk around. They should be ambulating. They should be extending their wings if given the chance to do that. This bird wasn't eating, which was a sign that something was really off. We thought at first maybe it's just a parasite load, and that was causing ulcerations. But he didn't respond to that initial treatment of that. And so we did more in-depth work. We had already done radiographs on his wings because that's typically what we see fractures in. We can also palpate those. But then when we dug more in depth on this is what we found. And the great part of this is he was released. He was released this spring with a friend of his that joined him later on during his treatment. Yeah, we were very happy to release him. So kind of an amazing recovery, really, when you think about the fact that whatever structure he hit it hard enough that it separated his organs, and he made it through the release.
Tami, can you just, I think most people know what HPI is, but can you just say that acronym really quickly?
Sure. HPAI is as people are calling it, the bird flu that's going around, but it actually stands for highly pathogenic avian influenza. And there's two types of avian influenza. Low path is always around. We always have it in birds. It's common. We don't even bat an eye. We don't even test for it. But the highly pathogenic means that it can spread like wildfire. And most of you probably are aware that this year is the first really big year that it's ever been transmitted and carried through the wild bird population. It generally moves through the domestic poultry business, but this year it moved through the wild bird population. The last time it was found in the wild bird population was in 2016. There was a Cooper's hawk that was just randomly sampled. I believe it was during a bird banding project out in western Minnesota that tested positive. And we actually had the very first bird in the state that year. It was a black-cap chickadee. It kept presenting some really odd neurosigns, and then it died. And we sent it in for necropsy, and it came back as high path. But in 2016, those were just like one-off random birds. It was not moving through the wild population like it has this year. And I'm sure you've read articles about like the gannets in Scotland, the cranes in India. I mean, we're talking long-term population consequences for some of these species where they're seeing die-offs of 80% of the species. It's really sad. We've seen a re-emergence of it as we kind of expected during fall migration. We started seeing HPI patients coming in a few weeks ago, and we're admitting and treating patients as best as we can. So far, there have been no documented recoveries of HPAI. And what it does is it moves up into the brain and it causes brain necrosis. And an interesting little side note on this, we were seeing all these red fox kits this year coming in. Our clients literally had videos of the kits romping, playing with their litter mates, interacting with their mom 24 hours prior. And then they would notice that the kits were a little more laterally recumbent. They would be laying down more, but they would still be alert. But the moms would be trying to nudge them to get them to play, to get them to come up, and the kits weren't responding to that. By the time the kids came into us, they were completely laterally recumbent, non-responsive. Some of them were seizing. So it was an odd pattern. It wasn't one that we'd seen before in fox kits at such a high number. And so we worked with our vets. Our vets decided to test and send to the D lab for full necropsy a couple of fox kits, and they tested positive for HPAI. At the same point in time, other wildlife rehab centers in New York, Michigan, Illinois, I want to say Pennsylvania, also discovered fox kits with HPAI. And the really sad part of it is, mom was probably finding all these easy prey, all these ducks that couldn't fly because they were sick. And we didn't have any adult fox come in with it, and we don't know. So did the parents just have a good enough immune system that they could battle it, or did some of the parents die? And that, we just never saw them, or is it that the fox kits were just young, a low immune system, and they just succumbed. But yeah, HPAI, as you all know, you're in the birding community. It's been just devastating to see on a day-to-day basis here at the center. So on that grim note, this is the window strike project that I was working on, and it's a little bit small on the screen. Don't know if I want to mess up my screen share. Maybe at the end of it, I have this on another screen that I can pull up for you that's a little closer. But what we did was we took pictures of the birds that had hit windows, and then we did the math, and we figured a central point that they migrate to St. Paul or Minneapolis, wherever they were found. And we recorded the amount of miles that they had traveled just to hit a window. And most of these are in the 2,000 to 3,000 miles. So you think about that, these little birds, they can travel 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles to either their winter grounds or their summer grounds. And they are stopped literally dead in their tracks by a man-made structure. And I don't know, it's devastating, and there's ways that we can try to prevent more deaths. And people like you who are getting the word out there are instrumental in making that change. And again, thank you for doing that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. You guys are probably quite familiar with this really powerful image that came out in New York last year. Someone who does the bird walks, just like some of you are going to be doing, documented 261 birds that she found in a single day outside of the World Trade Center. And you think about this, right? And our mass decline of birds that we're seeing across the board in the last 10, 20, 30 years. You've heard the numbers, I'm sure. They estimate anywhere from 800 million to 1 billion birds die annually from window strikes. And again, these are things that we can try to make better. And I think we owe it to the birds and nature that we should. I think you should always try to make the world a better place if you can. So here's just some information about that. If you work with a company that has a high-rise building, I would encourage you to talk to management, have the cleaning crews turn off the lights as they finish the floors. Getting rid of those lights makes a huge difference. And I do want to give a shout out to 3M. They are fabulous. Every single spring and fall, they turn off all their interior lights, except for just a few here and there. And they are actively saving birds by doing that simple step. And honestly, they're saving on their energy costs too. So it's just a win-win. What to do if you find a bird? Y'all know about us. So you can always bring us a bird. We're open 9 to 6 every single day of the year, even holidays. These are just some steps that you can do to contain the bird and keep it safe until you bring it into us. We do ask that you don't use anything that can ravel. It shouldn't have any fringe edges on it. It shouldn't have any terry loops on it. Woodpecker tongues get caught in terry loops. And usually by the time you realize that, there's too much damage done and the bird can't be saved. But for the safety of the bird, don't use a hand towel. Even if you have to use an old t-shirt, a pillowcase is ideal. But there should be something in the bottom of the box just so the bird isn't scrambling around on the hard surface of the box. Also make sure you tape the lid shut. You don't want to open up the door the next day and have to chase a bird around in the room. Don't give it any food or water. Birds don't eat or drink at night anyway. And it's just going to probably end up getting into the water and becoming cold and wet, which isn't good for the bird. If you have a hummingbird, we do want you to give the bird an opportunity to drink from a feeder so it does not go hypoglycemic. They go into torpor overnight, so you don't have to worry about the overnight hours, but never put an open container of nectar, like a little dish, in with the bird. Getting nectar off of feathers is so difficult to do, and the resulting feather damage usually means that the birds have to be overwintered here. And overwintering birds is never ideal. We're a hospital. We fix things up and we send them out the door. Keeping an animal healthy in a man-made foreign environment like this for months on end is really, really difficult. So please don't put open containers of nectar into boxes with hummingbirds. Make sure that they drink from a feeder before you put them to bed for the night. And then first thing in the morning, give them a chance to drink again before bringing it to WRC. Banded birds, you can report to the BBL. BBL is the bird banding laboratory. If you find a bird that has a little metal band on it, that is a BBL band. And if you just Google BBL banded bird, it will come right up to report a bird. The cool thing is you can get the history on the bird. You can find out where and when it was banded and even by who. So that's kind of cool. And then I wanted to talk about this. So for most of our patients, we tell people to put the box halfway on a heating pad, especially with like young mammals. So the animal has heat but can get off. We actually changed our protocols a few years ago on this based on new studies on concussions. And heat is actually really bad for concussions. It can cause additional brain swelling, and birds with head trauma already have difficulty regulating their internal temperatures. So this is a new protocol just in the last few years. No heat for your bird if you're keeping it in a box overnight. Don't put it on a heating pad. Don't put a hand warmer in with it. And then that's all I have for the collisions. I just wanted to mention, though, that we're incredibly honored. We've been working with Joel Satari. You may be familiar with him. He is a National Geographic photographer who is on a mission, a personal mission that National Geographic picked up on to document every species of animal that is currently in some type of human enclosure. So he's been working with wildlife centers, he's been working with sanctuaries, he's been working with zoos, and his whole goal is to try to make more awareness of individual species out there that make up our amazing world. I mean, he's done everything from like little tiny insects on up to elephants. And he takes these beautiful photos, and we're really, really fortunate that we've worked with him. And I think so far he's documented about 30 or 40 of our patients. So that's really exciting project that we've been doing. And then the last is I just have a slide about our social media. I'm kind of a one-person department in that area, so our social media kind of fluctuates. During the summer when we're really busy and I'm tied up with intake more, unfortunately we see a slight dip. If you've been following us, you've probably noticed that our posts are starting to climb, and that's because I have a little more time now. But we do try to document most of our patients and tell their stories. They're oftentimes amazing stories, and the only reason we can share those is because clients have made the time to save those animals. That's all I have. I will stop my screen share because I think Marion has a slide that you guys want to put up.
Sure, thank you for that wonderful presentation, Tami. And I just wanted to cap it off before we go to Q&A by saying, as Tami pointed out, many of these collisions are preventable. And so we hope that you can get involved. We'll post some resources at the end of the talk for you to find out how to advocate for birds or make your own windows bird safe. And again, we'll be hosting an event called Global Bird Monitoring, where we go downtown and walk routes to find birds that have hit windows or buildings or skyways. And even if those birds do not survive, we can capture them in a data set submitted through the Global Bird Mapper, and then scientists and advocates will be able to use that data to help inform better policy and bird safe buildings. So just wanted to end on a little positive note, but you guys can type any questions you have in the chat. I see we have one question that is asking for an update on the glass on US Bank Stadium, and another question about the effect of wind turbines on birds, and if you have any thoughts about the trade-offs of wind turbines and bird collisions versus renewable energy.
So all those things are a little bit outside our scope, right? I don't know anything about the US Bank Stadium glass. I know that you guys actually have been really instrumental in trying to affect change there. But you know, again, that's outside our scope. We're a hospital, so we don't do population monitoring. We don't do things like that. We do every now and then get in patients that have had a collision with wind turbines. Usually those are bats. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that research, but they have found that bats are the #1 species that are killed by wind turbines. And they think it's because it throws the humming of the wind turbines, they think it throws off their echolocation. But you guys, honestly, I don't know. That's not, you know, our area of expertise. But there are some papers out there on it, so you could Google it. Wind turbine echolocation bats, and probably find more data on that. I think the last bat that we had come in from a wind turbine was 2 or 3 years ago. So
we have a tip from Ann Laughlin, a WRC volunteer, and she wanted to remind people who are doing bird safe retrofits on their own windows to make sure they space the decals and markers 2 inches by 2 inches apart, because very small birds, including hummingbirds, can fly through small spaces. So if you're just putting, like, some people put like butterfly decals and other stickers on your glass, and it has to be, I believe, in a grid that has vertical lines spaced 4 inches apart. So she included a link that we also have for the end of the program, and I will make sure that gets posted. So someone asks, what do you personally use on windows and the sliding glass doors of your home to best prevent bird strikes?
yeah, so I don't have sliding glass doors in my home. It's not very fancy of a house, but we do have a huge south-facing window, and we use the window alerts because they're clear and they're UV reactive. And we put those up on our windows. I personally do not follow Ann's rule. I will admit to that. But we've got the window's massive, and we've got 2 packs of stickers on it. And that has eliminated all window strikes of birds just flying normally. You most likely won't eliminate all window strikes with decals or any type of marking on the window. Because when they do predator flushes, that's pure panic. And so when birds do a predator flush, like, they'll fly into each other. I don't know if you've ever seen a flock do a predator flush, but juncos, especially sparrows, they will actually collide with each other. They'll hit the bird feeder. They'll hit a bush and kind of flop into the bush. So predator strikes, predator flushes, you can't avoid the window strikes most likely. But for all the other common ones, especially with juvenile birds, right? I swear juvenile woodpeckers are the worst flying birds in the world. I watch them come up to our windows and do the veer away from them when they see those decals. I will remind everyone on those UV reactive decals, they have to be placed, follow the instructions, right? Just follow the instructions. They have to be placed on the outside of the windows, and I actually recommend changing them every 4 to 6 months. For us, we change them out every year at the start of migration, and then there's nice fresh details up there for the next 3 months.
We have a question, and I can answer it for Audubon, and maybe you can answer it for WRC. Are you doing any outreach with architects to educate them about the problems of windows? With the modern trend of, I think, architecture, we see many more homes being built with large glass windows.
So in private homes, that's harder. I don't think there's any legislation out there, but you might know, again, more about that than I do. For private homes, I don't think there's any legislation out there. In bigger cities, Chicago, I think Toronto's on board now, New York, they have regulations for high rises and skyscrapers. 10 stories and above have to be some type of window or glass that has a deterrent in it. So it can be the vertical striping. Some of them have a film that they put over them. There's all sorts of different things. Minnesota does have league requirements or suggestions, and I think that's listed in them, but I don't know if that's like an actual legislation in the state.
Right. So I believe the city of Minneapolis passed legislation on new skyways. It didn't impact the ones that are already built. And then our chapter has done outreach with architects. Our advocacy committee previously hosted a workshop with architects, and it was for continuing education credits on bird safe building design. So we have done some work, and obviously there's still a lot of work to be done, but thank you for that question.
There's actually a great company here in Minnesota, in southern Minnesota. Can't remember if it's Rochester area, but for those of you who have been out to the new Springbrook Nature Center, you know, they did that massive redesign of it, and their bird safe glass windows are just beautiful. And they use the local Minnesota company for those, and they've actually partnered with quite a few other places, I think, including the Bell Museum. So there's a local company that does it. I don't know if they do residential.
Okay. Another question, do you ever see pigeons coming to the hospital, and have they adapted to the urban environment with tall skyscrapers?
That is, well, first of all, yes, we see quite a few pigeons. Most of them are banded birds, which, you know, are domestic birds. They legally belong to someone, so we don't keep those birds. We try to reunite them with the owners. And then as far as window strikes on pigeons, I don't know how many of those I've actually seen over the years. And I think it's because unless there's a predator flush, right? Like one of our peregrines chasing the pigeons around, they typically don't fly like our migratory birds do trying to get through a city. They fly in their general vicinity, but they have a much smaller territory or footprint, if you will, than a migratory bird trying to make its way all the way through this corridor of buildings.
Okay. Let me just see if there's any other questions. We have time for a couple more if anyone wants to type one. Tammy, I'll just ask, is there anything that someone has not, a question that has not been asked, but that you think is important for people to know about avian impact injuries?
I guess just that, you know, a lot of times when we see those neurobirds, well, that common yellow throat was obviously dying, right? She was gasping, was probably bleeding internally. But a lot of times when we see these neurobirds, people think that they're just temporarily rolling and, you know, they'll come out of it in a day or two, maybe 2 or 3 days. They think, oh, the bird will be fine. The problem is keeping the bird alive during that time. And usually by that point, honestly, those neuroscience, the amount of pressure that's being applied to its nervous system to cause that rolling is so significant. The bird isn't going to come out of it. But even if they could, the fact that the bird is continually rolling and can't control its body movements, there's no way that bird can eat and drink and maintain its health while it's undergoing treatment. And those guys are just too tiny. We can't do, fluids and things like that on those little tiny birds on a regular ongoing basis, meds, things like that. And we can't tube feed those little tiny birds. And usually by the time birds are found by people, they're already really thin because they've been on the ground for a while before the person realizes, oh, this happened, unless they happen to see the window stripe. And even then, sometimes people see the window stripe and they think, oh, the bird might be okay. I can't tell you how many times people call me, oh, we had a robin hit our window a couple of days ago, but it's been hopping around in the yard and we thought it would be okay, but it's 2 or 3 days down the road and the bird isn't flying. Should we bring it into you? Yes, yes, you should. So, that I can guarantee you that robin is going to be really, really thin at the time of admit, because when birds are in pain like that, they don't tend to forage as well as they should.
So any more questions? I'm going to stop recording and then